So after a couple of weeks away to digest the results from Bahrain, F1 was back at it again for round 2 of the 2023 season, with the travelling circus for the third year running heading to the fast-flowing so-called streets of the Jeddah Corniche Circuit, or after last year, the now more accurately named Saudi Arabian Missile Testing Centre, a venue that took the name of the Netflix Drive to Survive series just a bit too literally. And actually, breaking news, this just in, we have live scenes of the modifications put in place to keep the venue safe this year. Coming into the weekend, where the standings were concerned, it was Max Verstappen and Red Bull firmly in the driving seat. Get it? Driving seat? I'm so funny. But the team were looking strong after a 1-2 finish in Bahrain, wrapping up the season in the fewest number of races since Mercedes in 2014. In behind, and it was looking like a three-way fight for second between Mercedes, Aston Martin and Ferrari, with the Scuderia having a car that was clearly faster than the other two, but also still being Ferrari. Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 2 in Saudi Arabia. Before we get going, I've got some exciting news, and that's the relaunch of the Prixrace channel, so if for some strange reason you want to hear me talk even more along with Not Applicable, CF Racing and Cars with Connor, then do go check it out. It's free, it's interesting, and it's more F1 content for you guys. Also, before we get going, as always, please make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy it and subscribe for more F1 content this year. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2023 Survive the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. So what had been going on in the run-up to the race? Well, for the second year running, changes have been made to the track to make it safer. It's almost like we knew it was dangerous to begin with and are now having to make changes that should have just been done in the first place. These changes include the raising of curbs and the moving of barriers to make seeing the track ahead easier. Now, I'm no expert, but being able to see ahead of you sounds like a pretty important thing in F1. Then again, Pierre Gasly did want to do half a lap with a billboard for a front wing, so I guess anything is possible. Other changes include the reprofiling of some corners to reduce speeds in an attempt to avoid big crashes. Though with no Mick Schumacher this year, that's 90% of the risk avoided anyway. Over at Mercedes and post-Bahrain, the team had issued public apologies to their fans after 2 straight years of bringing a Williams to the track, saying they'll look to move forward and get back to the top, with a rumoured new development direction in a few races courtesy of James Allison. Not gonna lie, I feel sorry for the guy. After delivering an absolute god of a car in 2020, the bloke just wanted to go off and build his boats. But after seeing the total abomination that these lot have created over the past couple of years, he's had to take matters back into his own hands. Meanwhile, over on F1 TV, and Jolyon Palmer has been broadening his horizons, the ex-F1 driver turned pundit expanding his skill set and presenting some new ideas for the broadcast. Over on Twitter, and it seemed the annual rumours for an F1 race around London had returned. Though after seeing the suggested layout, it looks like it'll be the worst new F1 track since they added Miami literally last year. I say that this monstrosity in Florida was the Spanish GP final chicane on steroids, and if that was the case, then what does that make this? I mean, just look at it. There are more chicanes in a row than Ferrari can string instant-free races together. Now, I'm all for a London race, don't get me wrong, but if you're going to suggest a layout, then at least make it reasonable. As it stands, Nikita Mazepin probably has a better chance of becoming an F1 driver again than this does of becoming a good F1 circuit. Though, in fairness, if they do manage to get another race in the UK, I'd be quite amazed, as apparently the government are already planning to cancel the existing British GP on the grounds that the paddock will contain too many foreigners. Ah, damn it, shouldn't have said that. There goes my chance of ever hosting Match of the Day then. On to Friday, and before the session, there was news from the Lewis Hamilton camp that he and his longtime trainer Angela were going separate ways. Not gonna lie, I wouldn't be surprised if she ends up helping Max Verstappen next. After all, he does have a history for stealing those closest to his competitors. On to actual weekend content, and it was some updates for the Ferrari car, but not good ones. With Charles and Carlos both having their engines replaced just 1 race into the season. Yep, you heard me, 1 race in. And for Leclerc, it was even worse, given he would be taking a penalty for having to fit a new control electronics unit. Again, given he already had one replaced in Bahrain. It does remind me of the old saying though, that there are 3 things certain in life: death, taxes, and things going wrong at Ferrari. Or as Sam Collins would put it,
well, Ferrari have run out of brains essentially.
Over at Red Bull, and Sergio Perez was struggling to get his car out of the garage. Pretty sure Christian Horner's already on the phone to Ricciardo to jump in and replace him. Later on in the session, Lance Stroll was improving his lap time by taking what I'd call the Lewis Hamilton line through turns 21 and 22. Talking of Hamilton, and he was having some issues of his own, made by an AlphaTauri going around slowly ahead of him with the Brit on a flying lap. Though given the Merc's pace this year, I can't really blame the AlphaTauri for not realising. On to FP2, and with no Nicholas Latifi to put the car into the wall, it was just issues with traffic, such as Fernando Alonso getting held up in his Aston Martin by the Ferrari ahead. Sounds like race day come early. Over at Red Bull, when it was problems for Max Verstappen, the Dutchman complaining of slow downshifts. To be honest, probably the only thing slow about that Red Bull. Talking of slow, and it's the Mercedes again. This time Lewis Hamilton in the way of his old Mercedes reserve, Nick de Vries, at the pit exit. Not as badly in the way though as Sergio Perez was, not seeing Carlos Sainz coming up the inside and the pair narrowly avoiding a collision. And finally, over at Ferrari, to round out the session, it was business as usual. On to Saturday now, and it was final practice for all 20 cars. Well, actually 19, as Nick de Vries was in his garage given the team had chosen to copy Ferrari's strategy and replace engine components. Elsewhere on track, and Lando Norris was encountering the Red Bull going slowly ahead of him, probably the only time he'll be passing a Red Bull all season. And then to round out the session at Ferrari, it was Leclerc going curb riding, straddling the red and white stripes at turn 22, but getting away without any major damage. On to qualifying, and after a pretty incident-free practice, it was spins galore. First off, Nick de Vries into turn 1, deciding to pull the handbrake to slow the car down instead of the conventional brake pedal. And if you think that that's just a rookie mistake, well, it was also one made by Fernando Alonso. As down at turn 1, the Spaniard got a bit too greedy on the power and got his Aston Martin facing the wrong way, which was still better than the predicament that Lando Norris found himself in, given at the final turn the Brit took the phrase hitting the apex just a little too far, damaging the car and leaving him out of qualifying and in P20. Over at Williams, and Logan Sargent was doing his very best not to join Lando Norris on the back row of the grid, by spinning his car at turn 21 and just coming to a stop before hitting the wall, which in fairness is still better than Nicholas Latifi did last year. Also out were both of the AlphaTauri cars, not because of any mistakes, they're just slow AF. Into Q2, and it was seemingly clear that Max Verstappen would be on pole after the first part of qualifying, except his car had other ideas. With the Red Bull's drive shaft seemingly giving up and dying, that was it for Max, having to jump out the car early and settle for what would be P14 at best to start Sunday's race. Just calling it now, as I'm recording on Saturday night, predicting Verstappen to win by almost 20 seconds. Toward the end of that qualifying session though, and it was Carlos Sainz in a bit of trouble, still in the drop zone, but the Spaniard managed to pull himself into Q3, leaving both Haas and Alfa Romeo cars to join Verstappen out in Q2. On to Q3 then, and it was Fernando Alonso first of the big guns to set a lap time, narrowly beaten by George Russell, who was then beaten by Charles Leclerc, with it all looking pretty close, until Checo came along, getting provisional pole by half a second. On to the final runs, and it was Fernando Alonso first to jump up into second, with Leclerc also able to improve but not by enough to catch Sergio Perez. It would be a solid P2 start if not for the useless Ferrari engine. But up ahead it was Perez in the Red Bull still at the top, turned provisional pole into pole position, starting from P1 in Saudi for the second year running. On to race day now, and Checo's P1 advantage lasted all of 2 seconds, as Fernando got up the inside and into first place by the first turn, having had a great jump off the line. A little too great in fact, as he pulled Esteban Ocon lining up outside his grid slot and was handed a 5-second penalty by the stewards. And a couple laps later was then handed P2 by Sergio Perez after being overtaken down into turn 1. Meanwhile, Alonso's teammate Stroll was a couple places behind and wanting some action of his own, going the long way round the outside of Carlos Sainz and putting himself up into P4 behind George Russell. Further back and it was trouble for McLaren, because if Bahrain was bad, well, Saudi Arabia was somehow going even worse, as Piastri had contact with Gasly and had to change the front wing, at which point he vacated the pit box, making way for his teammate Lando, who also had damage and needed a front wing change as well. Oh McLaren, what has happened to you? Talking of people having a bad day, and after starting on hard tyres, Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes went from slow to, well, very slow, swiftly being overtaken by Leclerc and then Max Verstappen, who breezed by on the main straight and up into P8. Talking of being overtaken, and it was Lance Stroll's turn, but not on the track, as Aston Martin called him in before the Ferraris, but with the warm-up on the hard tyres, he lost out to Sainz and Leclerc as well. But sadly for the Canadian, it was about to get worse, as the car gave up the will to live and he was forced to pull over and retire from the race, pulling the car over about as perfectly out of the way as is humanly possible, or as race control would put it, in a more dangerous place than the track venue itself, as they called a safety car, not a virtual one, but a full safety car. I guess in fairness, approximately 3mm of the rear wing was still stuck out onto the track. But the safety car was called and everyone that hadn't pitted did so, which gave Ferrari an opportunity to display their incompetence, as they decided to not tell Leclerc about going quickly to stay ahead of Hamilton, and so Charles lost out. Onto the restart then, and it was the number 44 Mercedes moving forward. Makes a change, I guess. Switching back on Sainz at turn 2 and getting the better exit, putting his car up into P5. All it took for a Mercedes to overtake a Ferrari was a safety car, a bad restart for the Ferrari, and softer tyres too. Up in front and making overtakes look easy in his rocket ship was Max Verstappen, breezing by George Russell on the main straight and up into P3, which then became P2 as he did exactly the same thing to Alonso. Meanwhile, further back and in the cars that were designed for actual use on Earth, and it was issues for Alex Albon, as his brakes did what Nico Rosberg did back in 2016, and just upped and left. Probably still a better fate than driving a McLaren this year though. Fast forward 10 laps and Red Bull was sitting pretty in P1 and P2, extending the gap to everyone else, though it does probably help when both the drivers decide to go straight lining the chicanes, well, just because they can. But as it turned out, they were both going wide with issues, Verstappen complaining of a dodgy drive shaft, the same part that put him out of qualifying, and Sergio having trouble with a long brake pedal, as it seems the only thing that can possibly stop Red Bull from getting a 1-2 at every race is their own reliability. Looking back into the midfield, and the battle was on for the final point, Kevin Magnussen v Yuki Tsunoda, the pair side by side into turn 1 with the Dane just managing to make the corner and take that point away from Yuki. Other battles included the McLaren drivers with some great racing, Piastri getting by Norris, then Lando getting him back, the pair with some good wheel-to-wheel action, all for the glory of finishing P16. It's okay, McLaren fans, I'm sure it'll get better. Talking of glory though, and back up at the front, Checo was busy taking home the win, with Perez, Verstappen and Alonso finishing in the top 3, as they seem to do in every session this year.
Why is it, when something happens, it is always you 3?
Except it wasn't, as the stewards handed Alonso a 10-second penalty for not serving his original one correctly, stripping him of what would have been podium 100. I guess that's a worthy punishment for trying so hard to impersonate Alpine. Anyways, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed, do make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. But until next time, take care.